everybody for joining us today for session 3. We're already almost halfway through the cohort, so it's very exciting and so glad that so many of you are here with us in this journey today. I'd love to start with just checking in with how's everybody doing. So in the chat box, please feel free to share what your weather is like today, like what weather word represents how you feel today and why. Are you feeling sunny? Are you feeling cloudy? Are you feeling rainy or windy or any other weather that describes how you're doing today? So feel free to please pop that in the chat and also let us know why. If you're feeling sunny, what's happening with you and what's got you going, or if you're feeling cloudy, what's happening. So please feel free to enter that in the chat box. For Benita, it's sunny with some clouds.
Yeah,
Why,
sunny
Benita?
because I
Why
get
the
to see
clouds?
you all.
Huh.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so sunny
Yes,
because
yes.
I get to see you all, but cloudy because too many things to juggle today. So bit distracted, but yeah, glad to be
True.
here and see all of you.
Great. Glad you could come. So Zianda is feeling cloudy, haven't had electricity for a week. Oh, sorry to hear that. It's always very difficult with the load shedding and electricity issues. We have a lot of that in India as well. But thank you for joining us even with the electricity issues. We really appreciate that. Rita's feeling sunny, waking up healthy and seeing all of you. Great, great. Sorry to hear you're a bit sick, Husna. I hope you feel better soon. And again, thank you for joining us, even though you're unwell or you're. We're really glad you're here. Great, great. Thank you so much, Lan and Kajuju. Great. Please feel free to keep adding as we move forward, but really glad to have you all here despite the troubles that are happening and that you could join us. So glad to hear that. I think so for today's session, we last time we looked at what and why of prevention. And this time, in the next couple of hours, we'll dive deeper into the prevention principles. But before we do that, just giving a quick overview of what's going to happen today. We have first the group check-in that we just did. And again, just seeing Anjali's message. Thank you for still being here, even despite a packed schedule. We appreciate that. So then from the group check-in, we'll move on to a little bit of housekeeping, then a review of session 2 last week, then looking at the prevention principles in detail, and then the group work and the take-home. So similar to the last session, the flow will be roughly the same as the earlier. And for housekeeping, just a quick reminder on the group agreements that we've had already, and we went over in the last session as well. We do request you to please keep your video on wherever possible. We know always we do have tech issues, internet, electricity, we completely understand, but if it's possible, please do keep it on. We get to see you and get to know you all a bit better and feel your presence here. Then we also request you to mute your mic. So if you're not speaking, please keep yourself muted so that others can hear, and we try and keep this session as easy as possible for people to understand and be a part of. Next, we again want to appreciate our diversity. We're all from so many different parts of the world and come with so many different social, cultural contexts, and have a lot of valuable learning to share, have our own valuable experiences to share, and be open to learning from each other and responding to each other, but being respectful that we do come from a lot of different contexts. Next, and I think one of our most important agreements that we do want to stick with is to step up and step back. So we want to hear from everybody, but as you are considering your own participation, think about, is this a space where you need to step up and have your voice heard, or is it a space where you want to step back and allow space for others to be able to share? So that's something, it's very subjective, but do keep that in mind as you're participating in the session and in your group work. Next, please sign in for session 3. Request Rita or Binita to please share the attendance link in the chat box. So please go ahead and go through that link and put your attendance in there. Sorry, just seeing Christopher's message in the chat box as well. Please do let us know if you'd like us to pause a bit. It's very distressing to hear what you've just shared. But we do want to be mindful. So if you do want to take a pause and let us know what would work for you, as Rita said in the chat box. Meanwhile, I think if we can share the attendance link with everybody.
Yeah, it's there, Rubina. And I think everyone can access it as well.
Oh, for some reason, it's not showing up for me in the chat box. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Let me share it again. There you go.
Oh, maybe it's not just my chat. Okay, thank you for saying that, Christopher. Appreciate that.
Okay. Binita, okay, you can keep going, Rubina. I'll check how I can handle that. Binita, okay. I don't know, for we're not seeing the link.
Attendance sheet is there, and I can also see that, like, you know, it is being accessed. So few people have already
great. I think it's just my chat box.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
But do let us know if any one of you are not able to access it.
Sure. I think while we figure that out, I'll just also request that for the assignments, please do try and submit them in the PowerPoint template. This just makes it a bit easier for us to review. What we have done, given the feedback from the last session, is to make the file a bit lighter so it's easier to download and for you to send back. So we hope that that has helped a little bit. But if you still have any difficulties, please do let us know, and we'll try our best to make that work for everybody. Great. So now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to check if you were still here. There was a moment of silence. Sorry.
Yeah, still here, just was looking at the chat box. But yeah, so now that housekeeping is done, we'll just do a quick review of last week. So session 2 that we had last week on the what and why of prevention, and looking at prevention and response, looking at the different kinds of prevention and all of that. So we want to just do a quick review of where we were. For this, I'd like to request one of our participants, Maria Concepcion. Please excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, but please do share your take-home exercise with us. The take-home last week was reviewing a short video about an organization called CREW and their experience. And Maria, if you can please walk us through your take-home exercise from last week. We only request that if you can please keep it to 3 to 5 minutes only, so that we have enough time to go through the rest of the packed session that we have today. But please just summarize what you shared, and then we can leave a bit of room for any questions that come up. So Maria, please feel free to start.
Okay, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. And And again, I just want to reiterate my support to the colleagues who's going through a hard time right now. You know, I'm very grateful to be participating in this session for this exact reason, which was what I responded in question 1. I'm not going to read it out because you guys can read it, but it's really those aha moments that I as a fund manager, my role is to manage a portfolio of grants to a particular group of partners in a vulnerable space. And my work can be extremely technical sometimes, and it can really focus on grant compliance. It can really focus on like helping them budget, helping them spend out the grant, etc. And I probably don't have the opportunity to get into the details of the programmatic work as much as I would like, just because of my role and how I work. You know, I want to make sure we're not extractive. I want to make sure that, you know, it's the people on the ground that are really leading and curating the work. But again, that aha moment came to me when I heard the phrase "singing the same song," right? So it just reminds me, periodically to go and find those spaces, carve out those spaces with my partners so that I can make sure we're singing the same song. And I can not only address whatever gaps I have, but also help them make sure that they also can communicate those aha moments as best as possible. Again, I mean, as all of you know, last week I had a hard time kind of understanding the difference between the two types of lenses that we use to look at preventive work. So again, this really just pushed me to go back and really reframe it with my partners who are mostly used to working in a public health context that responds to a larger Department of Health context within the US government. So again, you know, just a lot of opportunities for me to understand how to best work with my partners. And again, I mean, we have so many people who are, so many of partners in Puerto Rico that are working on campaigns, public service announcements, creating websites, the helpline. So really, this is an opportunity to make sure that, you know, it's a continuum. It's a clear, concise message, and that, you know, it's like a pipeline of work and everybody's doing different things, but there's one message. So I definitely have a lot of homework to do, and that's what I most learned about in last week's session, and I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Thank you so much, Maria, and just sharing the second half of the exercise with everybody to take a minute as well. And but thank you so much for sharing that, and also acknowledging that these are new concepts, right? Like we're also trying to that going back to this and thinking back about what session 2 was. That's why we try and have that space of being able to reflect on what like the take-home exercise offer that space for reflection on the session. And we're glad to hear that that's something that resonated and supported what you were feeling.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing this. And
sorry, I just want to add one more thing that I forgot to say. In my group sessions, I was on the call with colleagues from Kenya, I believe, and just listening to their personal stories about how they interact with police stations and the judicial department really helped me like appreciate how we share similar contexts. And so I'm hoping that in the future there's really an opportunity to sort of bring that work in the region with other Latin American partners, because, you know, maybe the only barrier is language, but the situation is absolutely the same. You know, the problems are absolutely the same. So if we can find a way to gap that, I think they would really close the circle.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's so valuable. And thank you for saying that. I do also want to encourage everybody, we try our best to have space in the session for people to be able to connect and learn from each other and find synergies like Maria has, but it's not always possible within the couple of hours that we have every week. But we do have a discussion forum on the Learning Lab where you can feel free to connect with each other, put up a post, ask a question, or if you want to connect with somebody there. So please do feel free to use that space throughout the week. And if you have something like this, if you would like to connect with somebody and speak a bit more, so please do that. And we'll also share the link again in the follow-up email to this session. But that space is there as well for us to be able to learn from each other and take that forward. But great, thank you so much, Maria. This was, we really appreciate this. Any questions from anyone or any thoughts about what Maria shared, or if anyone would like to respond to this, please feel free to either unmute or use the chat box, whatever feels right for you. Okay. If not, then I'll request Rita now to please take us through the key messages from the previous session, and over to you, Rita.
Thank you so much, Rubina, and really thank you, Maria, for sharing the insights from the take-home exercise. And I just wanted to say we got similar reflections in the take-home exercises, and we really like the fact that people are relating this to their work and already starting to think about what does that mean to their prevention work. And thank you, Maria, for sharing that you've been discussing already with colleagues. So we're looking forward to hearing more experience from colleagues who are sharing with their workmates or people around them. And this is a conversation we need to keep holding, right? Thinking about prevention and response, how we do it in our day-to-day programming. So here are the few key takeaways, and I know, Maria, you've tackled on 2 of them already. We talked about response, and one key points here we wanted to highlight is that, yes, we know response is providing services to survivors, but we also highlighted the fact that as we work with these people who are providing the services, looking at the existing policies, building the capacity of these institutions and these individuals, we also doing response work, right? And remember, we talked about this in a continuum, like a continuum from response, prevention to response as a continuum. And I like that, Maria, you also mentioned that. So for prevention, we said prevention is addressing the factors that increase the risk of violence against women occurring. And this, we focus on the fact that as we do prevention, we're working at transforming attitudes, norms, and behaviors, and also structural factors that can be causing this violence to happen. So the last point that we wanted to highlight is that response services for survivors are critical, and that we were all in agreement with it, okay? But we said we cannot reduce the levels of violence that we saw when Benita presented evidence from across the world. We cannot reduce this high level of violence by supporting one survivor at a time, all right? We're not undermining the work we do as we support a survivor. One survivor means a lot. 2 survivors mean a lot, but we cannot face this high level of violence by addressing the problem one at a time. So it's crucial that we work across the prevention to response continuum to end the high levels of violence. And that's what the last session wanted us to open eye on to know how we can work, yes, at prevention if we want really our impact to be visible, to get that impact we want to see as we reduce violence against women and girls. Okay? Any point before we, any reflection before we dive into the session of the day? All right. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll let you unmute and talk to your points. Okay, so today, like you can see highlighted, we're going to be looking at vow prevention principles. Okay, we've talked about violence. We unpacked what that means. Yes, we unpacked what that means and what it was, and we talked about prevention, like we just gave the takeaways. And we said why we need to prioritize prevention, all right? I can see there is a hand up. I'll come to you. And now we'll be bringing this to a more practical way to talk about the principles, violence against women principles. What are those principles that uphold our vow prevention work? All right. So that will be in the next session, today's session, and in the next sessions, like you can see on the screen, we'll be talking about understanding the causes to find solutions. There is this progressive way, understanding, looking at the principles, then understanding the causes so we can find solution. And after that, we'll talk about some strategies that we can use, you know. And then after that, we wish that towards the end of this course, we all be able to look ahead and start looking at what this means in a practical way for our work and what we need to adjust, to change in our programming. Okay, I'll pause here and go to Lily. Lily, is that a hand up? If you want to voice your idea? Okay, Lily, can you hear us? Maybe it's Lily.
Looks like
okay.
a mistake.
Okay, all right. So yeah, if Lily, you can hear us, and when you need to say something, we'll let you voice it. Okay. So like Rubina was saying, today we are halfway of our course, right? And we really appreciate that you're staying with us. We hope this is helpful and we are enjoying learning with you. Okay, let's see what we'll be doing today. What are the objectives of the session today? So today we have 3 main objectives, and at the end of this session, we want first to be able to explain the 5 vow principles, prevention principles, that we identified at the Prevention Collaborative and their importance for the prevention programming, okay? We'll come back to that. Second objective, we want to be able to describe how to put these principles into practice. As we know, having principles, no matter how these are good, and having those in theory will not really be helpful as we want to fight violence against women. Okay. Lastly, the third objective that we have, we want to be able to identify and possibly overcome, to know how to identify and overcome, and at least if we can't mitigate the challenges that we encounter as we start to uphold these vow prevention principles. So understanding how we can identify them and how we can possibly mitigate them will be another objective. Okay. So I believe, Benita, if any comment in the chat that is talking about the content, I'll be happy to let people unmute and talk to it. But if it's logistic, thank you for keeping an eye on that. All right. So now I want us to first ask ourselves a question. Okay, why do we think that these violence against women prevention principles are important? We'll be talking about these principles, okay? And I know you have many that you're already familiar with. But why do we need principles? Why do we think it's important to have vow prevention principles? As we look at evidence we have from around the world, as we saw in the in the previous sessions, and we look at programs that have been successful, okay, we find that these programs have something in common, all right? And we look at the similarities. What do they have in common? They have been upholding key vow prevention principles. All the programs, most of the programs that have been evaluated and which have proven to be successful, they've been upholding these vow prevention principles. And this is, like we told you, we come from an evidence side, and we talk about things that have been, found to be useful and working. So we found that they have some principles in common, and I'll talk about those. If you can click. So first, we know that, one click, Rubina, yes, we know that it's somehow difficult to have successful and effective programs if we do not have some key principles, if we don't uphold those principles, and we'll talk about these. And we know that these principles have to be rooted in safe and ethical practices, okay? So we are sure that if we uphold these principles, our programs will be implemented in a safe and ethical way. And you know how this is important, yeah, for whoever is doing violence against women programming, right? Implementing in a safe and ethical way. And now, because these principles are really important for safety and ethical consideration as we look at our programming, at the same time, they are important for successful programming. So here I want to emphasize that they need to be considered at all stages of programming, from design stage to implementation and even evaluation, as we look at how successful we've been or not successful, as we pause to reflect. Okay, so we need to be thinking about these at all stages, and it would not make sense, for example, if we said we are considering the principles that we're going to detail at the design phase and we are done, and neglect them as we start implementing. Okay, so these were like 3 key points to say why we know that these principles are important as we think about programming. Okay, so we just said the principles are important, right? And they are key to our programming. But now let's pause a bit and talk about these principles. What are they? Which principles are we talking about? Okay, I know we have different organizations. We're coming from different backgrounds as practitioners, as researchers, and you have different ways of referring to the principles that are upholding our prevention work. And what we present later on will be what we identified from the prevention collaborative lens, what we identified as our key principles. But we also want to value what you have already in your day-to-day work as principles that are upholding your vow prevention work. And I want to ask you, we want to hear from you, what are those principles that you see upholding the vow prevention work in your context? Okay, please feel free to put in the chat and share what are those principles, what are those key things that you consider as you think about prevention work. Ideas in the chat, please. And remember, we are here to learn. Yeah, the do no harm. Thank you so much, Njeru. Yes. Participation and non-discrimination, very good. Confidentiality and consent. Thanks so much, Alfred. Yeah, believing in survivors, confidentiality, again, safety and security. These are really key principles that we see. Being non-judgmental, thank you so much, Lan. And Bello says inclusiveness. Absolutely correct. Care and empathy from Abid. Anjali, you see, these are the principles. Whenever you sit to think about prevention work, you already have some key principles, all right? And like I was saying, yes, Lily, impartiality, evidence-based, survivor first. Natasha, thank you so much. And this is really important to see how we have these principles. They are similar. We may have different terminology, but we all have key principles that are guiding our prevention work. All right, safety of women and girls. Thank you, Bello. I think you are already in the prevention collaborative language. That's great. So thank you so much for sharing this in the chat. And I'm going to ask Rubina if we can click and show what are these 5 key principles that we at the Prevention Collaborative have identified as really upholding successful VOW programming, prevention programming. See, we all had this in our chat. So first we have accountable to women and girls. We also have the second one based in a gender power analysis. Yes, and yeah, I can already see that people keep sharing those principles in the chat, and people encourage you to read what is in the chat for the co-learning. So the third one is being inclusive and intersectional. We've seen inclusivity and leave no one behind there. Prioritizing the safety of women and girls. That's exactly what Bello said, and you all said it. We need to be careful and take care of that. So there is another one, starting with ourselves. I know maybe it didn't appear like that in the chat, but I know people can relate, right? Okay, so for the next session of this presentation, I'm going to take us through each of these 5 principles, okay, in details, all right? And please feel free to stop me at any stage so we can have a discussion, we can share, all right? So I'm going to talk about each one of these principles in 2 main parts. First, I'll talk about what it is for us at the Prevention Collaborative. Hopefully you can relate. And then I'll talk about how to do it. How can we put this principle into practice, okay? Like we said, no theory without practice, all right? Okay, now let's start by being accountable to women and girls, right? So what do we mean by that? What it is? Like I said, we'll see the what and then the how. When we discuss this at the Prevention Collaborative and here, we need to ensure we know which women and girls we are talking about. That's very important, okay? If you say accountable to women and girls, whose girls are we talking about? Whose women are we talking about? What do we mean when we say accountable to women and girls? So at the collaborative, we are actually talking about being accountable to women and girls who participate in the program, as well as those in the broader community. Are we together? So those individual women and girls participating in the program, but also those who are in the broader community where the program is being implemented, which sometimes people tend to neglect. These are the 2 groups of women and girls we are talking about being accountable to, okay? So now, it's important to talk about how to be accountable, you know, not say, you know, it's easy to say, we need to be accountable to women and girls, but now we need to specifically know how to be accountable to these girls and these women. All right. So here are a few suggestions of the how from our side. Firstly, we need to consider requesting input and feedback and be responsive to these inputs and feedback at all stages of programming. Okay. It's easier. Yeah. Sometimes we bring a program and we think we know what is good for those women and those girls because maybe we've done research and we think we understand, but sometimes we neglect the feedback we can get from them. This can also mean that, you know, actually this means when, for example, we're doing a formative research, okay? And many of you, I know in your work, before you implement a program, you do the formative research, all right? So if we're doing a formative research or any research to inform our program design, we need to ensure that we are doing this research in a participatory way to ensure it goes back to the community as well as it's coming from us. We need information from them, but we also need to consider, you know, give room to be informed by that information, but also go back to them and make sure that we are being accountable, okay? Let me check. Okay, great. So a good way to build this accountability to women and girls is to partner. Another way is to partner with those people, those women, those people who know the context. And here we are suggesting to work with these women's rights organizations, those organizations that have a good understanding of the context, those organizations that are there, were there before us, that are there on a daily basis. And if we cannot partner, at least build a relationship with those organizations, that relationship of mutual understanding, mutual trust and respect with those who are locally in the context, okay? And who already play a key role in safeguarding women, okay? So those two things are important to consider as we think about how, right? And this is how we see being accountable to women and girls at the Prevention Collaborative. Okay, let's, if you have a question, put it in the chat or feel free to stop me and then we can discuss. Second, the second principle we have is based in gender power analysis, all right? What do we mean when we say our program needs to be based in gender power analysis? At the Prevention Collaborative, what that means to us, it means that we need to recognize the centrality of gender inequality as a driver of violence, okay? And I think that I really hope it resonates to you as we think about programming. And as centrality, it's central to the the inequality is central to the violence that we see. And we need also to see it as a risk factor that shows up in different ways at many different levels of our work. And that the gender inequality increases actually the risk of violence. So we need to recognize that, just accepting and recognizing it as such, okay? And then base our programming in that gender power analysis. All right. It also requires an understanding that those men, here we're talking about men, and I know many of you will think about when we talk about violence, and we've seen the evidence and many of the reports you've read, you see that most of men, I mean, the violence that women, IPV, as we talked about it, that women experience is by their intimate partners. And in most of the cases, there will be those men, but not all of those are violent, right? So it requires us to understand that those men, the minority or the whichever number of men who choose to use violence, also use and reinforce these gender differences that are already existing, these privileges that they are already, you know, benefiting from. And these men are mostly motivated by the need to maintain power and control over women. So there is these gender differences, there are inequalities, there are privileges, and these men, the few that choose to use violence, are motivated by the need to maintain power and control. So that's why we need to keep an eye on our analysis to the gender power, you know, see the dynamics, and then know how we can program accordingly. And again, this looks like, you know, it can change from context to context, from country to country, and from community to community. Maybe what it is, the dynamics, what they are in your context are not necessarily what they are in my context. But the principle here is we need to be basing our programming in a gender power analysis. Okay? All right, that was the why, the what. Now, let's look at how to apply this principle. All right. So we need to analyze these dynamics in specific contexts, like I was saying, where violence is occurring and where we hope to be implementing our programming, okay? So don't copy and paste. That's when we talk, maybe it's on another course, we can talk about adaptation. We need to be thinking about what is the reality of our context, okay? So we need to analyze the dynamics in those specific contexts of our implementation. We need to be specific, in other words. All right, specific context, specific analysis. We know that the gender power analysis is important globally, everywhere. When we need to do the prevention program, we know it is important to do that. But we need to be thinking about specifically thinking about what it looks like in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Nepal, in Myanmar, and look at it and program specifically against what can increase the risk of violence occurring, all right? Another important point that I want to mention here is to understand how programs will affect these dynamics and vice versa, and consider how this is important for prioritizing the safety of women and girls, and think about it as we are designing our program. So we have a program, and we think about if we program this way, and if we had these activities, we need to know whether this will affect negatively the security, the safety of women and girls, and think about designing the program in a way that keeps them safe, all right? As we will keep seeing, safety of women and girls needs to be at the core of our work. Okay, so we will be talking about this in details when we get to another principle, like I show you, the safety, the one about keeping women and girls safe. All right, any question and reflection in the chat? Okay, I don't see any, and I hope we are still together, all right? Okay, so the third principle I want to be talking about is being inclusive and intersectional. And again, this came so clearly in our chat as we were talking, all right? So many people talked about, being inclusive and not being discriminatory, not being, leaving anyone behind. Right, this is exactly what we're saying. Let's use our usual way of analysis and talk about the what and then the how, all right? Our definition of intersectional, is that different forms of oppression and discrimination work together and compound each other. Are we together? Different forms of oppression and discrimination work together and compound each other. That simply means they make each other worse. Simply put, they make each other worse. That's what we mean by intersectionality. So it's important to be aware that these interacting forms of oppression, they could be race, class, you're oppressed because you are of a different race, class, nationality, ethnicity, name it, disability status, religion, as well as gender. All those points of oppression or discrimination work together, compound each other. That's what we say, and they make each other worse. Here, then, it is important to understand two things, right? If we need to make a clearer analysis. Firstly, like we said, all these forms of structural violence, we see of oppression, like the race, disability, ethnicity, all those forms are structural. They constitute structural violence themselves. So you can suffer violence because you have a certain disability, because you are from a minority class, because you're not of that country, of that community, right? So there are forms of structural violence. And this is actually, if we, for example, like a concrete example, if you're living in a community, let me give you an example, in a community where you are exposed to discrimination according to ethnicity or religion, and on top of that, you are a woman living, having a certain disability, this is already, it increases your vulnerability, okay? And one of each was already exposing you, but the more they are combining, they're intersectional, they increase your level of vulnerability, all right? Also, these interacting forms of oppression we've been talking about often increase the risk of a person being violent to another, interpersonal violence, that is faced by specific categories or groups of women. Okay, this is what I was trying to describe. You can be a woman in a refugee context. That puts you on a vulnerable place already. It puts you on a higher risk of experiencing violence, all right? So if you add these other forms of discrimination, it even makes it worse, okay? So if this is what we call intersectionality, sorry, I'm letting people in. If this is what we call intersectionality, if this is what intersectionality actually is, what does it mean to us? How do we uphold this principle when we think about our programming? All right? How do we ensure we are inclusive and intersectional in our programming? Okay, thank you for those who put this in a chat, and maybe I'll be able to pause and ask people, what do they think can help them uphold this principle? Anyone who said we need to be intersectional and inclusive? I can go back and check the chart. People who talked about being inclusive. Bello, you talked about inclusiveness. Do you have any point you want to make on about how we can be inclusive? Sorry to put you on spot. I just want us to share the floor. Okay, maybe Bello is not able to unmute and speak. Yes, do you want to say something, Bello? Okay. That's Lily. Lily, go ahead. There is an echo, Lily. Lily, can you? Okay. Sorry, Lily. Thank you. I know you wanted to say something, but there was an echo. Maybe you can come back later. All right. I just wanted us to share a few ideas of how we can uphold this principle. So when we talk about intersectionality, how do we work around that to uphold that principle? Firstly, it's important to ensure that our programming is safe, all right, and welcoming, all right, and engaging and relevant for diverse groups of women and men, right? When we program, we need to look at all diversity that we've identified and make sure that our program is safe and it is including, inclusive and welcoming, and it gives room to engage with these different groups of women and men. We make sure that we are being inclusive. We are not leaving someone behind because a certain category of oppression is keeping that person out of our thinking of programming, especially if they are at a risk of experiencing violence. Secondly, we also need to consider all forms of diversity. Like we were talking about race, class, we were talking about ethnicity, migration, and everything that you can name as constituting a risk, you know. So we need to consider all forms of diversity that we have in that specific context, that specific community, or we need to be implementing. And when we say a program should be safe, welcoming and engaging for these groups, it is important to consider two key things. Have diverse groups who can come together and discuss an issue together, but also to potentially have space for marginalized people to have their own space to discuss how certain issues impact them particularly, okay? You have a program that may have, you know, addressing a certain women issue, but also consider that in that group of women, we have women with disability. We have women who are single mothers. Do we cater for space for those women to come together and talk about that specific issue they have in common and how it impacts them? And each context may require a specific approach. All right, I think I dwelt a little bit on that. So let's move in the interest of time. The other principle that we're going to look at is prioritizing safety of women and girls. And again, I kept coming back to that. Whatever we do, we need to keep that in mind. And we look, later on, we look at how all these have to be, you know, thought about in a comprehensive way, all right, in a holistic way. So prioritizing safety of women and girls. What do we mean by that? Can I please ask one person at least? So I know I'm talking to people who are with me as we go. One person at least to say, when we talk about prioritizing safety of women and girls, what do we mean? Anyone? you can also put in the chat, if that's okay.
I can give an example.
Sure. Thank you, Nonzwakati.
So in some of the GBV work that we've been doing in mining communities, what we consider around the safety of women and girls are the spaces within which we're holding the conversations and the interventions. We look at the impact of the intervention and what it will mean for the safety of women and girls. So if there's a provocation which could trigger their partners or whatever, making sure that we're considering all of the multiple impacts of that. And then also looking at, okay, for activating these women and girls to report, are the structures in place to support them in what happens there? Is the response mechanism safe enough, accessible, and there to protect them?
Absolutely. Wonderfully said. Thank you so much, Nonzwakazi. And this is exactly what we're going to detail. We need, like your colleagues are saying in the chat, we need to make sure if we have sessions, if they are held in a safe place, for example. We need to be creating enabling environment. Thank you, Sanjong and Shan, for sharing. And ensure that their space where we're working, they are safe and secure to express their feelings, okay? Yeah, keep sharing in the chat. Thank you, Njero. And being, yes, that, Charlotte, very important to make sure that our programming is not actually enhancing the violence against these women and girls that we are working to protect, okay? Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. So we know that prevention is about transforming attitudes, norms, behavior, and structures. And if we're going to do that, we need to be challenging that unequal power relation, the existing unequal power relations that we talked about. And we need to understand that challenging those unequal power relations can increase the risk to women, especially for specific types of women, you know, like we were describing on the previous principles we talked about. And like Nonzwakazi was saying, we need to be, you know, to be looking at that and making sure that our programming is not provoking extra violence. Remember, when we talked about prevention, we said you can prevent it before it happens, but we can also prevent cases of escalation. You can prevent it from, you know, worsening. So as we program, we need to be keep thinking about that, okay? So understanding that we want to make big changes as we transform attitudes, norms, and behaviors, we want to make, we are doing transformative changes. We are changing, and this is such a big change, okay? And this is going to involve challenging some status quo. You know, people were living in their comfort zone. People were saying, this is how it is. We're going to be challenging the status quo, particularly challenging the power relation that we've been unpacking, and think about what can we do to make sure that safety of women and girls is our priority, and that the work we do is there to minimize the risk, like Nonzwakazi was saying, the risk of these girls and women in our programming to suffer some backlash. You know, and people were and colleagues are putting it in a chat box. We need to think about how can we minimize backlash in our programming. It's not that easy when we are challenging these power dynamics. We'll find some barriers. Sometimes women will run the risk of suffering backlash. So how are we, as we think about safety of these women, how are we thinking of concrete ways of mitigating the harms of backlash of our programming, okay? So here's very few ideas, and I'm sure you have many ideas and you'll be sharing in your groups, ideas of how we can uphold this, you know, principle. We think that we need to consider participatory risk assessment and safety planning. If women are interested in participating in a program, for example, and that the program may represent, we know that it may represent some risk for them, it is important that we bring in an empowerment lens and an understanding of women's agency, and that we have honest conversation. Let's not just think about a program and say, this is how it has to go. Let's have conversation. Let's know what can be these risks, okay? So this should include maybe risk assessment for women who want to participate, and safety planning that we have as we think about our programming. Remember, we said from the beginning, and whenever we judge it necessary, sit back and see how it is impacting safety of women as we go. So support and service to survivors. Right, that's an important point. We know that doing prevention programming may not increase violence, but may very likely increase disclosure. All right, we need to have in place plans to support survivors of violence and to refer to existing services for survivors that may provide the services that we're not offering in our programming. All right, that's why we talked about response, talking about building the capacity of the service providers. All right, and this actually is taking us back to the prevention to response continuum as we discussed in session 2. Last point, but not at all least, to make sure that we are monitoring backlash, okay, and addressing them in timely manner. Addressing anything that may affect women and girls who are participating in our programs or who are in the wider community. Keep that in our mind, who are in our wider community where the program is being implemented. Are we together? I need to see people's reactions, maybe a yes in a chat or a thumb up if we are together, because we need to be, yeah, okay, great, thank you. I can see thumb ups. Great. Okay. So our fifth, not last at all, last but not least, as I want to say, yes. So starting with ourselves, I want to pause again and ask one person to say, what do we mean when we say starting with ourselves? Thinking about prevention programming, and we say starting with ourselves. What does that mean to you? Either in the chat or a volunteer, one volunteer to unmute and tell us, what does that mean to you? Okay. All right. We are programmers, we are practitioners, we do a lot of programming. Accountability, yes, Sanjong, walk the talk, exactly. Yeah, practice what we preach, like people say. Yeah, Nonzokazi has a quote. O'Brien said, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Exactly, right? You are a broken person and you're going to mend people's hearts, it will be difficult. Thank you so much. I will steal that quote. We need to be aware of our own attitude. Very important, Sean. What attitude are we bringing in? Okay, self-awareness. Keep sending in the chat. I like the interactions. So when we think and talk about starting with ourselves, we think at the Prevention Collaborative, and I think it's a shared kind of thinking here, we think it's important for organizations as well as for individuals who are working to prevent violence against women and girls to be looking at all these issues of gender, power inequality, and privilege in our own work, in our own personal lives. This is exactly what you are saying. There is work, but there's also our inner, our personal, you know. As organizations, it has to be something that we are considering at a systemic level, having good policies at policy and institutional level. Do we have good policies? Do we have them in place? Are we applying them? Are we monitoring how they are applied? You know, and so on and so forth. All right. So as individuals, who are we coming as? What is our attitude towards gender inequality? Do we have a negative masculine behavior? Do we have that empathy in us? Okay, so many things. So it starts with ourselves, but here I just want to mention starting with ourselves as organizations, but also as individuals. Okay. So a quick ideas of how to uphold this principle as we wrap. So examples, when, for example, we are hiring, all right, we need to select for values as well as for skills and experiences, and create processes that support staff in their own journey of transformation, okay? You may be looking for specific skills, get the person with the specific skills, but not, that person may not have the value. Maybe because they're not exposed to these core values that you want as an organization. So how do you put in processes in place so that your staff who's got the skills now buys into your values and really, like there's a very good French word, marry the values, you know, make the values theirs. So they are, you know, they have the skills, but also the values to do the work in a safe way, in an ethical way. How do we ensure that those who are not at a level that with positive attitudes, how do we encourage or accompany them in the journey of transformation? Okay, we all grow in different contexts, and socialization we go through shapes us in a way or another. So we need to cater for room to unlearn or, you know, and look critically at what we have taken from the society surrounding us and know how it can impact the work that we do in our community. Organizations can help by creating processes, as we said, that support staff and offer space. We need to be offering space, okay? So in addition to that, we need to foster what we mentioned here as collective care with processes to support staff around safety and secondary trauma. Some people, there's someone who said, how do you come in this work? Your inner person that you bring in this. Yeah, we know that this work we do, violence prevention, can be heavy on us as practitioners. So this is another piece of starting with ourselves. Self-care is good. We need to prioritize that, but also collective care is even better. At work, how do we care about each other? We need to support each other. If we fail to take care of ourselves and prioritize our safety, it is so unlikely that we'll be able to support these women and these girls in the communities where we work. Okay? All right, so great. I'm seeing very good comments in the chat. Thank you. Self-care, Natasha, self-discipline, self-accountability. I like that 3 self pathway that you're saying, like self-care, self-discipline, self-accountability, right? And organizations knowing that you may not have the perfect staff, but what are those processes you need to have in place to make sure that safety of your women and girls yourself is ensured. Okay. All right. So that was the 5th principle. On the next slide, it's just to show that if you can click. So this is just to show how these principles are all interconnected and overlapping, and they are based in a feminist analysis. So what you said in the chat and what we've been discussing, it shows that you cannot just say you are doing prevention work when you're just saying, I'm going to be doing my programming basing into a gender power analysis, and that's all. You need to be thinking about all these 5 principles in an interconnected way so that you can have a successful VAL programming. This is what I had to say about the principles. Any question, any reflection before we go into a deeper reflection in our groups? You can unmute yourself and speak. You can, okay, I can see thumb ups. Thank you, Shan. Does it mean you're okay with that? Is it clear?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, thanks, Sanjong, and this is great. Oh, yes. So we just gave these 5 key principles that we identified, and I was so happy to see in the chat that most of the principles that people were sharing are really, they do resonate with what we put together. So I think we can have time to discuss more in our groups about these principles, how we encounter them in our work, and how we can keep improving. Charlotte, did you want to say something? I hope she just wanted to join. She rejoined. Okay, as usual. Okay, so yeah, I see your comments. Sorry, Zainab, if you have connection issues, you'll catch up with the recording. And Dickens, taking work looking first before helping others. Yeah, I know. Yes, you need to make sure that you have that positive attitude, your norms are positive, your behavior is a good one before you even start helping others. All right, I totally agree with you. So now very quickly, we're going to go into the groups. I want to explain the group. I want to make the group, sorry. Yes, so you'll be sent to 5 groups to discuss the work. I'll open the groups in a minute. Okay. We want to make sure that in your groups you discuss, you have a lot to share. And like we do every time, we need you to be capturing notes, write as much as you can discuss in the notes, because we may not be able to report to all the groups, all the ideas we shared in our groups, but we also want you to be looking, as we have access to the documents, we want you to access other groups' discussions and be able to know what was said in other groups. So here, for the good use of time, we want you to have a person who will facilitate and a person who will take notes. They could be the same person, and then we'll allocate you a few minutes to report back when we come back. So what are we going to be doing in our groups? So we'll be in 5 groups, 1 per each principle. Group 1 will work on being accountable to women and girls. Group 2, based in a gender power analysis. And Group 3, inclusive and intersectional. Then safety, prioritizing safety of women, and then starting with ourselves, all right? So what you asked to do, we have questions on the next slide. So we need you to share your experience of how you have used or not used the principle in your work. So maybe you know this principle, or you've just heard about it. If you think you've used it, discuss it. If you haven't used it, say, I think we missed upholding this principle in our work, right? And then this will be an individual kind of sharing as you discuss. And then together, you will discuss how might you apply this principle in practice and give concrete examples of how you may include this principle, okay? What challenges might you face in upholding this principle? And how can you respond to or manage those challenges? So you will have slides. Do we have, can someone put in the chat the link to the group work? If not, I can fetch it and put it in the chat. So you'll have slides. Okay, you just did. Thank you. Can people?
I just added it, not your if.
It is. Yeah. Oh,
Rubina
did. Thank you so much, Rubina. So I have the groups here. So make sure you have someone to take notes, and take as much notes. Write all the points of discussion. And if you can scroll down so they can see how the slides will be looking like. Okay, so we've divided the question. Each part of the slide will have responses to one of the questions. Okay. We'll give you 20 minutes for a deeper sharing in your groups, and then we'll bring you back to discuss. Okay? All right, I will, any question before we open the rooms? Okay, I'll set the group work for.
So hope everyone got a chance to use the time in the groups to chat with each other and talk about what these principles mean in your context. Okay, great. I think almost everybody's back, so we'll get started. So thank you so much again to everybody for taking the time in the group work and engaging with each other. We know a few of you had some tech issues as well, but thank you again for staying motivated and being a part of this. So I'll request group 1 to get us started. If you can just summarize and share what you all discussed. We'll request you to please keep your reflection under 5 minutes, so ideally 3 or 4 minutes at most. So we have enough time to listen to everybody and be able to wrap up the session on time. So please requesting someone from group 1 to just summarize your discussion on the first principle.
Thanks, Rubina. This is Nancy presenting on behalf of Group 1. I forgot to include the members' names, but we had Ekon, Husna, and I. So on the principle of ensuring that we are accountable to women and girls as a key prevention principle, based on our experiences on how we've used or not used this principle, we had different reflections from the team. And one of them is that ensuring that the community participates actively in our program so that we listen better to their voice. Secondly is that we ensure that we have women and girls at the forefront in presenting their advocacy asks to the leader. This is basically key to ensure that all the engagements are led by the community as opposed from having us as the workers leading these engagements. Also, we sought to ensure that women and girls are aware of their rights and have equal opportunities to be leaders within their safe spaces, because these safe spaces are within their communities. So we sought to ensure that all our program participants become leaders in these groups, and also as the team leads, we're able to guide them on how to engage with other team members. And also there was a reflection on ensuring that the staff that are recruited have a key understanding on the skills and knowledge on how to undertake the prevention work, which is very key to ensure that they have positive attitudes, even as we seek to engage with these program participants. How we might apply this in practice, we had several examples, and that includes that we need to ensure that despite ensuring the community participates actively, we are giving them feedback. It doesn't need to stop at them presenting their views, but also we need to be accountable to them by ensuring that we are giving feedback so that they get to know whether their input is being factored in our programming. Also, they need to ensure that there's inclusivity by taking considerations of everybody's opinion, ensuring that they are given equal opportunities to participate in decision making. And the last one is movement building, so that we bring on board, by bringing on board other feminist groups, so that we're able to jointly amplify the voices of women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Nancy and Group 1. And we do also appreciate that you've looked at not just being accountable to women and girls, but the other principles as well, and tying them in together. So thank you for that, and to everybody in Group 1. Now requesting someone from Group 2, if we can have a volunteer to share what you all discussed.
Hi, this is Sean. I will be sharing, and then my colleague Saman will come in if I'm missing anything or because I usually keep things very short. First of all, I want to start by saying I was in a group with another 3 male members, which was really making me very happy to see more men working on this, on the prevention, and because it's very important to have our male colleagues support us in this effort. The way that we talked about the using of the gender power analysis, we have been using, almost all of us have been using the gender power analysis, either in GBV core concept training or GBV case management training, during awareness raising sessions, and we go over the different types of powers. We provide the power exercise when people can see the power gap and the gap that it causes, and then make sure that we go back to the main cause, gender-based violence, which is unequal power, and we're able to communicate that. And one of the best examples was 3 of us have used it, but one of my colleagues had participated in an activity that did the power analysis, and he talked about how informative and useful that was for him to learn more about gender-based violence and power. And then we have colleagues who are using the SASA curriculum. They're also touching on the power analysis, as well as they talk about the different types of power, abuse of power in all its forms. When it comes to the concrete example, one of my colleagues mentioned that 60%, studies have shown that 60% of men are abusing their power. And one thing that their organization has done is zero tolerance towards violence against women in the organization. Another colleague mentioned that community activists and activist leaders and religious leaders are using the power posture or the power analysis to better understand the importance of power when it comes to gender-based violence. And we are being realistic. We also talk about challenges that we're facing, the social norms and the mindsets that sometimes are really challenging, even if we try to explain everything very clearly, but there is pushback against the topics that we're talking about. Thank you so much, Simon. Please feel free to jump in if there's anything else.
Thank you so much, Shan, and to Group 2. And thank you especially for sharing like the examples of how you have used this in the past, and great to see Sasa together in there. In fact, Rita and I were just talking about it while you all were in the breakout group. So thank you for sharing that. And also invite others that if you do have any experiences that you would like to share about any of these principles, or any reflections on what the groups are sharing, please do add that in the chat box and use that space. I think Nonzwaki has just also given an additional +1 on the inclusion of men in these conversations. So please do use that space as well if you have more that you'd like to share from your own experiences. Now inviting Group 3. If someone from Group 3 can please just summarize what you all discussed.
Well, thank you, Rubina. I and the group members somehow lost each other, so we ended up doing something a little sketchy. But I'll request my fellow members to put their comments in the chat section, or they'll supplement after my submission. They had some views, but we couldn't get enough time to put them here since we got lost from each other. My organization here will look at availability of the policies that actually govern the day-to-day work. Some of which include the non-discrimination. That is actually a core value here in my organization where I work from. It encourages gender inclusiveness, and we have them in each of the engagements. Part of the things I wanted to share again were the induction of all workers and their periodic trainings on the same. So we train all new workers, and then we have periodic reminders on the same. How might you apply this principle? Well, I was looking at one thing being designing and developing a radio spot message where you have to make sure it is not affecting any a person out there when you're communicating. You shouldn't discriminate anybody when you're communicating. For example, in Kalangala, we have a number of races, a number of people from different parts of the country who come to work in the plantation of palm. So when you're designing such a message that goes to those people, you shouldn't put something like something that affects the race or the gender or the any of that kind. Thank you. Maybe a group member can supplement or they can put in the chat section.
Thank you so much. I was in that group and we had a problem with the screens and all that. So sorry. So on inclusive and intersectional, the organization I work from usually makes use of that, and we ensure that everybody is not left out. We take into consideration everybody's input, and by doing what we call participation first, so that we know what they really want before we employ anything. And in dealing with gender issues, we have what we call interagency approach, where we involve all the sectors of where that place is. For example, the police, the judiciary, the people on the community, the administration, all of them, so that, and the community, all of the community members, so that we come up with what, how to deal with the prevention together, and they give us their views. So that is what was it. And at one point I was even in typing, it was in group 1. So sorry about what we went through. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Christopher and Lillian. Despite the tech issues, you were able to share these thoughts with us. So really appreciate that. And I think very important points being made here, like Rita said.
And before that, how might you, let me finish. How might you apply this principle in practice? Like now when we're doing policies and all that, we start from the ground. Here in Kenya, we have what we call bottom-up approach. And that is exactly what we are really doing, it from down upward. So we ask the household to the village to do, before we put in, we come up with policies or change policies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lily.
Can I make a small addition?
Yes, please go ahead, Dickens.
Yeah, just a small addition. On starting with ourselves is one of the principles that we have applied so much in our work, because before you tie somebody's shoes, you need to tie yours first. So whenever we recruit staff, there is always training that takes place to ensure that you are prepared to undertake prevention work and you develop positive attitudes for supporting other people. But also we have reflection meetings, reflection sessions during the training, pulse checks, to check on people's, people's values, but also their attitudes, because they change over time. So whenever we do a training, we would be able to drop a pulse check, without warning them. And you still see how people, are a little bit imbalanced. Inclusiveness is, we always endeavor to reach that most difficult person to reach, balancing them based on their social backgrounds, but also balancing them based on their status and economic status within the community, and balancing them according to geographical regions. Promoting safety for others. Under the Real Fathers Project, Responsible, Engaged and Loving, a mentoring program, where we target the men, but the beneficiaries are the women and the children. We try as much as possible to engage what we call the significant others within the community who are able to survive, to support the woman, to thrive over the new changes that we are introducing in the community that address gender-based violence and violence against women and children. The challenge usually is the strong cultural values, because you have to work over time, because those are the obstacles that you have to work against. Interconnectedness, finally, is the other thing that we usually appreciate, because these principles don't work singly. They have got to be interconnected. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dickens. And I think, again, your comment has really tied together a lot of what you taught us today. So really appreciate that.
Also happen with women savings loan. We should also be having our activity monthly with them.
Sorry, Bello, I'm not sure if we were able to understand. If you'd like to put it in the chat box, maybe. If you can put your comment in the chat box. Okay, I think Bello might be having some technical issues, but please do use the chat box space as well. Now requesting group 4, if someone from group 4 can please share a summary of their discussion, please.
Thank you. I'll start with the question 1.
Sure.
Share your experience of how you've used or not used this principle in your work. Policies in our organizations around safety and security, violence, harassment, Cohort POSHI, used to prevent violence, raise voices of women experiencing workspace as unsafe for employees and program participants. We also use existing community forums for women and girls to hold GBV prevention interventions, such as women's prayer groups at church, which allows women to attend and share in these spaces without their family or spouses knowing what they are engaging in GBV interventions. This provides the protection of confidentiality and anonymity. In our organization, we deal with widows, empower them to talk about GBV, and invite them to come with their friends and other women in the community who they feel safe to share with. How might you apply this principle? Yeah, I lost that. Okay, let me continue reading the response. Ensuring physical spaces where we intervene are safe for women and girls. Also being mindful of time of day, access to safe ablutions, etc. Creating confidentiality safety measures for women and girls to feel safe to report. Apply policies without fear of being named. The way we ensure women and girls' safety is that we have created safe spaces in our community where they can easily feel free to share what they are facing at home and community. Taking the women and girls to safe houses after experiencing violence to shield them from perpetrators. For marginalized and isolated communities, difficult to access spaces which are far away, develop easily accessible centers or facilities in the community which is near to their home. Let me go back to that for the last time. Creating spaces for survivor and perpetrators to safety, share, and understand root causes of the violence, to hear both sides of the incident, then coming up with an intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kajuru. And really, I think you've summarized a lot of very important points about how we can be ensuring safety for women and girls, and especially in how these programs are designed and making sure that it is a safe, accessible space for women and girls to come in for. So really great to see this. And we will also share the link to the group work exercise with everybody. So if you'd like to go back and read about the interesting programs that people have been part of and reach out to them again to learn more, please do feel free. Now requesting our last group, group 5, to talk about the starting with ourselves principle, and just summarize your discussion around that, please. Any volunteers from group 5?
Hi, I'm Sanjog from Group 5. So we discuss about this principle on starting with ourselves. And while discussing about that, we also discuss how this particular principle is interrelated with the other remaining 4 principles. Because while discussing about starting within ourselves, we need to start within ourselves with other principles as well. In terms of sharing our experiences on GVV and how we are practicing this in our work, that some of our team members has been working on areas of GVV and working with the survivors, and through our own experiences and awareness session dealing with the survivals, we have realized that how it's important to starting. We need to start that changes and thoughts needs to start within ourselves. But however, there's also the lots of backlash, especially from men, while discussing or the using or the practicing the start, or let's say the accountability part of starting within oneself. That's why we also realize that changes in behavior of men is very important, because if we start blaming and pushing forward to the women, it will be more burden to the women. So we thought that while discussing about the changes and starting with ourselves, I think we need to change the men. And sometimes we also go through the internal challenges as an organization. However, through the other way of having a policies and then like that, we can actually mitigating those challenges as well. And coming to the how we might be applying. So as a group, we thought that consulting with more women and girls, this is how we came to know and will be known that how we can work in a more better form. And we also thought that engaging men and boys is very important, and bringing them and holding them accountable and encouraging them to change themselves is very important. And also in some of the organization, including mine, we do have the policies, but we have not categorized our principles like it's been shared in today. So it's in my mind, it's maybe the mind of my other colleagues, but we have not legitimized our principles in the written form. So this is something that I've learned, that we need to legitimize and we need to discuss further to have a consensus on our own principles as well. And the third point is also follow the same thing. We need self-accountability, self-clearance. So starting with ourselves is not, should not be limited within the organization. Our relations with the people and societies beyond our organization. So how we're dealing with the everyday relationship beyond our organization is also very important. That's why it shouldn't be limited within the organizations only. So, and at the last point, you can see that other principle is equally related, interlinked with this particular principle. So we need to see how the power dimension is working, how the behaviors is work, and then how we can safeguard, response, recover, and rehabilitate. So we need to interlink with these particular principles with other principles. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sanjog and Group 5. I think you've put a lot of the conversation together, and especially the need for interlinking these principles, and they do work together, like it's not in isolation of each other. So keeping all of them in mind together. I do also want to invite everyone to check out a self-paced course that we have that might be of interest. It's also called Starting with Ourselves, Reflecting on Power, Gender, and Violence. It goes deeper into some of the conversations around these principles. We can share that link with you in the debrief email, in the post-session email tomorrow. But please do check that out as well if that resonates with any of you. Now, I think, thank you again to all the groups. Please keep the discussion alive on the discussion forum. We can also take up any more questions or anything that comes up in the next session. Now requesting Rita to please take us through the take-home exercise. I'll just share my screen. Give me a second.
Before we go on, excuse me?
Yes,
Please go ahead.
Yes, Lily.
Yeah, you see, the next session is going to be on 8th. 8th happens to be International Women's Day, and we're going to be doing some activities. I, for one, am a lead person in my county. So what happens to that session of 8th?
Thank you,
What
Lily.
happens?
Yeah, thank you. We aware of that, and this will be in the group. This will be one way of celebrating the International Women's Day, trying to understand how we can do better our prevention work. And we really salute whichever activities that we'll be doing. We'll be looking for, yeah, that's fine.
They may not be able to attend the session.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. We understand. And you can catch up with our recording, and we will be looking forward to hearing what activities you've done when we meet again on
all right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for mentioning. We don't want to keep you any longer. We want to quickly go through the take-home exercise for next week. And here is what we want to do. So we'll have some reflection questions for you, and we want you to respond and submit the responses to the usual email that you have here. And it has two parts, this take-home exercise. Part one, we want you to consider a vow prevention program that you may be working on, that you know or you're familiar with, you've read about or you heard about. And we will show you tables that on the next slide later, where you have to fill in some information. So part one on that table, you'll share some background information about the program, because we need to know what the program is about. So just a quick, a short background, so whoever reads your reflection knows in which context you're talking from, right? So, and then another part will be to talk about how is each principle put in practice in this program. So whichever program you pick, describe it, give a background information, then go into it to say which principles are applied in the program, and how they are done, how they are upheld in the program, and how could each principle that is in the program be strengthened in the program. So there may be some principles that are really fully taken consideration of, others that you feel like they needed some push, and they needed to be strengthened. So we'll be looking forward to reading the program and how the principles can be improved, or describing how they were applied. Okay, that will be part one, all right? Part two, we need you to just prepare for next week, yeah? It's a preparation. You prepare for the other week, where we'll be talking understanding causes to find solution. So we want you to watch the video or read the text on part 2 and part 5 of Mercy's story. So and as we will be looking at those in the following session to identify the risk factors for Mercy in the story, and for this we will be sharing links. Maybe if you can go on the next slide so they can see the table. But for part B, we'll share the links on the Learning Lab for you to access. And also in our follow-up email, we'll be sharing the links where you can access Mercy's story and already talk about which identify risks that you see in that story. So here is just the table. We want you to share the background, put your name, and the name of the program, sorry, and then you write notes about the background of the program, right? Brief description of that. So the other parts, like we said, for example, if you're talking about accountable to women, has the program been upholding that principle? Yes. If it did, how is this principle put in practice in the program? If it wasn't, how can this apply? How can this principle be strengthened if you had a chance to redo the program or to revamp the program, how would you now strengthen that principle as you think about programming, okay? And you do that for all the 5 principles. And we're not saying that in each program you'll pick, there'll be all these principles, but in case this one of these principles, let's say it didn't consider starting with ourselves, just say it wasn't, that you think it wasn't upheld in the program, and say how you think it should have been considered or it should have been strengthened. Is that clear? I want to see yeses in the chat or thumb ups, but if something is unclear, again, feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, it is clear.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Thanks, Deacon.
It's clear.
Yeah, thank you. All we need is to see that you've, for the sake of us reading without maybe being familiar with the program, make sure that you give us that background so we can understand. And if you have a reference to that program, just put it so we can go and read further about the program and then read from an informed position. Okay? All right. So, and again, here are just reminders, you complete and you send. This is such a usual business. You send us by Sunday 5th for review. And if any problem, need of support, we are here. Rubina, Benita, and myself, we are here to support, okay? Thank you so much for today's session. And here is how you can stay connected with us.